This conference will now be recorded.
All right. I think Maya, you're next.
Hey everybody, I'm Maya Burke. I'm the Assistant Director of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program.
Alex, I've got you up next on the list here.
Hi, I'm Alex. Visiting today. I'm a postdoc on the Long Island Sound study. Thanks for having me.
I guess I am up now.
Yep.
I'm also Alex. I'm a PhD student at University of South Florida College of Marine Science.
I think it's me next. This is Carrie Lopez. I'm with FWC, FWRI. I'm in the harmful algal bloom group.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Chris Pratt with the Environmental Protection Commission of Hillsborough County Water Division.
Dave Carlin. I'm also with the Environmental Protection Commission of Hillsborough County and also with the Water Management Division.
Hey, hi there. I'm Emma Dantis. I'm an environmental specialist with Pinellas County.
Good morning, everyone. This is Greg Blanchford, Manatee County Parks and Natural Resources Department.
Good morning. My name is Julie Christian. I'm with the EPC Water Division.
Hi, this is Mike McManus. I'm an ecologist with the Environmental Protection Agency.
Hey, Mike Wessel, Janicki Environmental.
Good morning, this is Nicole Reynaud, Chief Scientist with Florida Institute of Oceanography.
Hi all, this is Paul Julian with Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation.
Hi everyone, this is Robin Spadell. I'm a project manager with our water quality monitoring program at the Southwest Florida Water Management District.
I'm showing one more for Sarah. All right, she might not be on. So at this time, Marcus, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you for some open science updates from the Estuary program and the partners.
All right. So I think, yeah, you should be seeing my agenda on the screen here. I'm actually really excited about the lineup today. I'm always excited about the lineup, but we've invited Paul and Alex to talk about some of the cool stuff they're doing. But before that, I always give my updates about what the Estuary program is doing with open science. It's actually been a long time since we last met. I believe it was August of last year. We opted to skip the end of the year meeting with the anticipation that we were going to be having BASIS during that time. But as you all probably know, we postponed that to next month due to issues around COVID and making sure that everyone stays healthy around that. So we're having our meeting now, our first of the year. And the updates I have quite a few actually, given that we haven't had a meeting in a while. So bear with me. I do want to make sure that we have plenty of time for Paul and Alex, but I do have some pretty cool things that I think are going to be of interest to this group. As always, I like to start with reminding everybody what this group is about. I think we have some regulars on the call, so you've definitely heard this before, but I do like to remind everybody about what the subcommittee is trying to do. We are part of our technical advisory committee. When I open the invitation to anybody that's interested in open science, we try to use this group as a vehicle to share the wisdom and understanding of what open science can do for conducting better science in less time, particularly how it can work towards more hopefully informed management decisions for Tampa Bay. As a group, I think have three general roles and responsibilities. It's all kind of laid out in this guiding document that you've hopefully seen before. We created this the end of 2020, I believe, when we were first developing this group. But basically, we're trying to, as I said, support the development of open science products at the Estuary program. I'm the one that's kind of leading the charge internally, but of course we don't want to do this in a vacuum. We want to engage the broader community and make sure that everyone that is, understanding and working towards the management of Tampa Bay are using open science as a vehicle to do this. And I want to share the ideas internally to make sure that we're all on board with what we're doing. As part of that, we, I think, try to rank priority research areas for developing open science products. We've obviously done several activities in the past towards, I think some of the low-hanging fruits of what were, I think, things that were ripe for developing open science products. But as we move forward, especially this year, there's going to be some new projects that I think we can shift our attention towards, and I'm going to try to use this group as a vehicle to kind of vet some of those ideas so that we're actually, all on the same page of what needs to be the focus of open science in Tampa Bay. And obviously a big part of this is training around open science. I think these meetings are meant to expose people to general ideas of what open science is, but we want to also train the community moving forward. And so we've had several training activities in the past focused around, using R, for example, as a platform for using open source analysis. But there's other ways that we can facilitate training because, open science is not just R, it's a sort of broader ecosystem of tools that we think can facilitate science. So I use this group to sort of think about these ideas and help us sort of move forward collectively in terms of bringing open science to this community. As far as updates, I want to start off talking about Piney Point. I don't want to, bring this up again and have everybody cringe and think about how horrible last year was. Obviously, Piney Point was a large event for Tampa Bay that we experienced last year. As far as what it means for this group in terms of the open science aspects, we have several products that came out last year, actually moving into this year now, of things that I think are important to highlight from that effort that I think exemplify how open science, I think, facilitated in part the sharing of the science around what happened last year in Tampa Bay. So we actually do have a preprint out now that is available for download that I think is accessible and provides a nice summary of the research that has gone into synthesizing the results of the sampling that happened in Tampa Bay around Piney Point. So you can definitely get your hands on that. It is actually in review right now, the paper in Marine Pollution Bulletin. We're actually in the process of revising it. There's a bit of back and forth with the editor about, how this paper is going to be revised moving forward, but we are anticipating that this will be published in the primary literature, hopefully early this year. In terms of what this means for like the open science community, as you all know, preprints are kind of like a way for the science to get out there a lot quicker. The downside of this is that it's not peer reviewed, but it's a way to actually make the science available in a much more rapid manner and sharing information that way. So we wanted to sort of harness that energy in getting this paper out there. So you can click on this link and view that information. Another important product coming out of Piney Point that I want to highlight is the data. We've been curating the data sets that our partners have been collecting for this effort. And it was available, it still is available on GitHub as a way to get your hands on that. But one of the things that I try to advocate for when I talk about sharing of information and being open, particularly from a data perspective, is getting data sets online into what we're calling federated data repositories. And these are basically places where they're archived, there's a DOI, anybody can access them, and there's full metadata. So this checks all the boxes of what we talk about when we say that data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So all of the data that actually goes into the paper is available online at this, this DOI. And so I just want to pull this up for you right here. So you can go to this link. I'm actually really sad because nobody's downloaded the data just yet. That's why I'm sharing it with you. But you can actually get your hands on it now, and you see that it does have full metadata documentation. And just to reiterate, this is like really important when you talk about sharing data, because this is meant to like really sort of describe in detail what is in the data, not just like the literal description of like the columns, the names of the columns, but like the context behind it. So we have like an abstract describing, you know, how the data were collected and all that fun stuff. So if you remember early last year, I talked about our data management SOP that we published as a program. And if you looked at that document, a huge part of that document is talking about metadata as a way to sort of facilitate sharing of data. And so this is actually us like putting that, you know, proof into concept right here. So we hope to do a lot more of this. And the Piney Point data set is just one example of how we're trying to do that as a program for sharing our information in a more transparent and accessible way. So download the data, get your hands on it, play with it. Hopefully, you know, arrive at the same conclusions that we did in the paper. Yeah, it's kind of the motivation there. Moving on to the next announcement, though, I talked about trainings is something we try to do with this Open Science Subcommittee. I mentioned this at the, I think our last Open Science meeting, that we're actually going to have an open science training. So we had that meeting in our open science meeting in August, and this training was actually given at the SURF meeting in November. So myself, as well as Dr. Chris Anastasio from the district, we actually co-taught this. It was sort of a 4-hour workshop we gave at the SURF meeting. It was really kind of covering a lot of different topics, but kind of giving that deeper dive into some of these broader topics of what open science entails. So this wasn't like an R training. This was like a training about how do you pursue better collaborations through, you know, online platforms using things like GitHub, or how do you work towards more tidy data sets with the idea that you want to like share that information in the future using some of the tools I just showed. And so we gave that training. We thought it was reasonably successful, but this was actually our dry run for BASIS, which is going to be coming up in March. And unfortunately, we actually had to cancel the workshop for BASIS. I probably won't be there, and Chris did not want to do this workshop solo. So at this time, we're not actually going to be doing this workshop again at BASIS. We think that maybe later this year, we will probably give this training again to this local group here. So look to an announcement for that, I think, in the next couple of months when we figure out how that's going to go down. Good news is the SURF training was recorded, so you can actually, if you want to listen to me and Chris give this training online, if you want to go through the content that way. Just to show you that this is all done on, you know, Bookdown, which is an R package for basically making web pages in this sort of long format here. But all the content's available, and if you want to get your hands on the recording, I believe it's right here. So you can just click on that, and then it goes to the YouTube page. So that's a training opportunity I wanted to highlight. Believe the last announcement I wanted to make was about our State of the Bay webpage. So if you've been following the Estuary program, you know that every 3 years we produce this report that's called State of the Bay. Every one of the NEPs does this. This is kind of like a high-level synthesis document that really just, it's meant to sort of feed the public or serve the public's needs of understanding what we do as a program and how the Bay is doing, covering all of the indicators that we think about that we can use to describe the Bay. In the past, we've done print copies of this. Joe Whalen actually put together the last one that we released in, I think, 2019 or 2018. So we're due for a new print version. But we also have an online presence for this report. So talking about open science, you know, one of the things that open science tries to do is leverage IT technologies as a way to sort of get the information out there through a platform that maybe historically has not been used to share science. And so we wanted to, with this new iteration of the State of the Bay, put this on our webpage in a new format that is meant to kind of complement the print copy, which is going to be published later this year, but also provide a new way to share this information in an open science platform. So if you go to our webpage, you'll see a State of the Bay right here. This was this was already online. We had this format already published on our webpage, but we've actually, in the last couple of months, updated this to pull in data sets and resources from our GitHub webpage that tap into the data sources that are feeding this report. So if you've seen this report in the past, the online version, we just had kind of like some static PDF documents that were just summaries that we actually were just kind of placeholders. But now moving forward, we've actually curated this content, tapping into the GitHub pages that tap into the data sources that make these reports almost summarizing the data in real time. So that might not be clear what that means, unless you've heard me talk about this in the past. But essentially, we have our water quality report card right here. This is just one example looking at water quality as one aspect of the State of the Bay. But this is all interactive. That's one thing we were trying to do with these updates, make the information much more accessible from like looking at the data. But where kind of this is a leap beyond, I think, what it was in the past is what you're looking at here is under each one of these tabs, they actually pull in web pages that are created on GitHub. And why that's important is, again, this is actually, so if you go to the GitHub page, the pages actually live here. So you can click on them on GitHub. So this is actually just a mirrored version of what's on the web page now on our TBEP page. But these web pages are created using R Markdown, which is a way to integrate text and R code into an HTML web page. And why that's important is because we can actually pull in data in R and compile these web pages using the most up-to-date information we have, so that what you're seeing on our TBEP web page reflects essentially the state of the knowledge of any one of these indicators we're reporting on. So I think that's a great leap forward for open science, especially how we report on this information. It's timely. It's linked into the data set one-to-one. And so this is how we're trying to do it moving forward. Just to show you as like one proof of concept, I'm going to show you the water quality page right here. This is the RMD file, and you'll see that like the text, this is actually what you're seeing on the web page. There's some HTML that sort of affects what it looks like on the web page, but we're pulling in the data sets from source. So this is where the rubber hits the road. When this document is compiled, we're pulling in the data and it's creating the graphics using the most up-to-date information. And so when you see things like, what is the status of water quality in 2021, for example, it looks like on the web page is like a static document that somebody created by hand. But if you actually go to the source document, you can see like there's actually placeholders for code that pulls in data. So results for, are max year. And so at the top of the script, the max year is 2021. When it compiles, it pulls in the data for that year and then updates the text relative to whatever year we want to report on. So in the source document, it looks like in whatever the max year is, Old Tampa Bay receives a score of, insert score from the data, light attenuation target of whatever. So tied into the data, hopefully that's like really clear. And again, this is what it looks like when it's rendered on a website. So this is like one-to-one up to date with the actual data set that is available to us. And so we've done this for all of our pages: water quality, total nitrogen, tidal creeks, habitat trends, Nectin data, other metrics we report on about community education efforts, reach efforts, all that fun stuff. So this is live. Please have a look at it. Let us know what you think. We're still editing the pages. There's still some graphics we want to include, ways we can improve the language. It's been a group effort. Everybody on the team has been looking at the text and modifying it as needed, but we think this is a huge leap forward for how we're reporting this information. So yeah, have a look at that. Let us know what you think. We're happy with the product, but we want to get feedback from you all in terms of how we can improve it. Then the last thing before we go on to our speakers, in terms of updates, every year, we produce our report cards, we get seagrass data, and we try to update our web products in kind. The State of the Bay was one way to do that, but other products that are reported to us as a program, we have our water quality report card, our dashboard. Those have been updated with 2020 results, so you can look at how water quality changes have occurred over the last year. Same with the seagrass transect data. Our partners go out every year and get annual monitoring data for seagrasses. The web page we have on the Water Atlas has been updated with the 2021 results as well as our dashboard. And then the last thing before we get to our speakers, sorry, this is a lot of updates, but we did have a publication that I think came out maybe like November of last year, somewhere between our last meeting and today. There was actually a paper that described our TBEP Tools R package. And this R package is kind of our workhorse that we've developed over the years to actually, again, pull in a lot of the data to synthesize for a lot of the reporting products we use as a program. And so myself, actually, Megan was a co-author on this. We published this paper in the Journal of Open Source Software that kind of describes this package in a little more detail. So definitely have a look at that as just another sort of product that describes the open source tools that we're developing as a program. So with that, that's it for the updates. I want to move on to our speakers now, but before we do that, are there any questions about any of those products? I'm sure there probably are. There were a lot of updates, but we can pause for a minute and see if anybody has any questions. All right, not seeing any. Guess, Maggie, you want to introduce Paul?
Let me remember to unmute myself. All right, so our first speaker today is Paul Julian from the Sanibel Captiva Foundation. And he is going to be talking to us about data everywhere, information distillation for Lake Okeechobee and Caloosahatchee River Condition Assessment. Paul, I'll let you go ahead and take it away from there. Are you going to be sharing your screen?
Yes, I will be. Thank you. Okay. Don't know exact. Here we go. Is that a new thing for me? So you guys should be seeing slides.
Yes, we can see it.
Cool. All right. So in the chat, I dropped the link to these slides in case you want to follow along and play the home game. I really appreciate being invited and talking about stuff, open science wise. This is kind of, I'm not 100% open science like pro, but it's kind of a continuum, and I'll show you kind of the examples of that. So before we start, I kind of want to acknowledge the land on which we sit. It has been cared for by innumerable generations of peoples of the past whose memories we honor. And this is kind of an opportunity, this reconciliation, an opportunity for healing, collaboration, and environmental conservation. So I got to give you a little bit of background of the Caloosahatchee and kind of why I'm going to show you kind of the reports that we generate. So most of you probably know the story of the Caloosahatchee, but it's historically the river really wasn't connected to Lake Okeechobee, and it was a meandering river that kind of eventually opened up into the estuary. It wasn't really a huge estuary by any means. And a matter of fact, down by Ponderosa, there was kind of oyster shoals and reefs that kind of dammed the water a little bit. So, of course, after late 1800s, early 1900s, the river was channelized. It was connected to the lake, mostly for commerce, but also for reclamation of land and development. And so with the new channelized river and the water management schemes we kind of have these challenges of sometimes too much water, which make the estuary too fresh, and we see significant environmental impacts, or the inverse is too little water, and we also see impacts. So it's kind of that Goldilocks zone. So back in 2011, the SCCF policy staff put together a weekly report for conditions in the Caloosahatchee, the estuary mostly, and the coastal area that leveraged a lot of the real-time data that's being generated from the Water Management District, the South Florida Water Management District, Corps of Engineers, as well as the Marine Lab. And here, if you're following, there's a link here. There's a kind of a log of the weekly conditions reports that have been generated since. And this link here will take you to the January 18th report. And essentially what it does is it pulls a lot of different information, like I said, into about a 1 or 2 page, sometimes depending on what's going on, 3 page or 4, but we try to keep it to 2 pages of a report. And I kind of want to talk about how it was done pre-2021 before I jump on the team, which is kind of stuff, it's kind of classic of any conditions report or information that we're trying to gather and share relatively quickly, is that we start with a whole bunch of data from a bunch of different places, and we put them in the spreadsheets, and we try to best we can do to track it and all that kind of stuff. So historically, what was done was, the team would visit the Army Corps of Engineers daily reports page, and I'll go to that page for just so you guys can see it, where they have a bunch of different links for a bunch of different areas, as well as different summaries for different things. And so the team would go to about 4 or 5, sometimes 6 different links, and gather that information and copy that all into a spreadsheet, summarize it, convert the data, because sometimes it's recorded, for instance, discharge it in cubic feet per second, or sometimes in acre feet. So you can imagine how that can kind of confuse things a little bit. And then, so if depending on the time of year or when programs were put together, we would check out the red tide page that FWC has to kind of pull maps or remote sensing information from either them or NOAA. And then more recently, the kind of freshwater blue-green algae has been kind of a topic of concern. So either they would reach out to people in Lee County Environmental Lab or try to ping DEP for information one way or another. And so that, on top of the stuff that we get from the Marine Lab, that we have staff that go out and take samples along the estuary every week. And then there's other stakeholders like Lee, Audubon, City of Cape Coral, others kind of feed into the information gathering process. And then so there's other information that can pop up depending on time of year, like shellfish advisories, beach conditions, wildlife impacts, and that information typically comes either from Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge or Crow out on Sanibel, the research or the rehab and rescue organization. Sometimes the Army Corps Water Management also has statements that they'll put out that would be also included into that report. And so that all got consolidated into a Word document, PDF, and then posted to the webpage. And so now, ultimately, so steps 1 through 3. So, visit the core sites, copy all the data in the spreadsheets, and then the HAB updates, and to some extent, PDF and post to the webpage can all be done via, web scraping, API access or backdoor access to data, as well as consistent calculations, and kind of you can post it either to a specific location on the web or take that information and share it, through different means. And so all that can be done in open science kind of applications. In our case, we use R and R Markdown. So taking a little page out of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program playbook a little bit, but here's a really simple example of what we were able to implement pretty quickly. This is kind of an example of web scraping. to where you're given an HTML, you have this R package, RVest, will read that HTML into R, and you can kind of piece apart the little chunks in there and actually split out the information. So if you go to this web page, this W3 SAG, yada, 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 see this report, this report, and I only showed the first couple lines of this because I obviously didn't want to take up the whole page, but each one of these lines can be separated out into, a variable and saved, and then, do what you have to do kind of thing with it, which is kind of convenient. And so now, using our reproducible science, kind of open science framework, we're able to kind of streamline the gathering of the information, and it really removes time constraint, as you can imagine, of going to different pages, copying, pasting, double checking that you copied and pasted, then realize that you didn't really copy and paste the right thing. It can kind of get tedious after a while. And so with all that information, we're able to kind of really look at the short-term trends really quickly, as well as kind of look at how much water is coming into Lake Okeechobee versus out, and where the lake stage versus, where it was 3 years ago or 4 years ago, or heck, if we wanted to, 10 years ago. And so it's really kind of a one-stop shop for a lot of the information. We're able to host a lot of this is through GitHub, but there's other platforms that can easily do this as well. And so real quick, I just wanted to kind of show you what today's report looks like. And so this is kind of our table of contents on the top here. And if you're specifically interested in any particular thing, you can click it, or you can spend the time and just pan through things. But a lot of this, like for instance, these tables here are information pulled from the Army Corps and summarized, converted and summarized, so that way it's consistent through time. Granted, there's some data points that are missing, and that's because it's not reported on the Corps site, for instance. But like what Marcus was showing, the text that you can kind of put together, for instance, this is text that's just like what Marcus was showing, where you have kind of stock language, but then you have insert value kind of situations where we can summarize information relatively quickly in a sentence format in the way we want it. And granted, some of these have a lot of if-thens behind it to kind of change the text a little bit, but our folks take this information, particularly this chunk of text and data, and copy and paste it into a document. Granted, like, and I have a confession slide later, but it's not 100% streamlined our process kind of thing yet, but it's getting there. But like I said, so this information's daily produced, and we're able to kind of put it out. Also, we have figures that we were able to throw together. For instance, this is the Lake Okeechobee regulation schedule, and relative to the stage from today, as well as this whole year and the past 2 years. Also some, statistics of what the stage was today, last year, year before, for instance. And some other cool little data graphics that we've put together to kind of show how fast the lake is rising or lowering, recession, accession, rainfall conditions through the, both currently as well as, what was it last year, relative algae conditions. For instance, South Florida Water Management District has several sondes that they put out that are connected to, Scada systems, so that we can access that data in real time and figure out what the condition is across the lake, that sonde data. And, we can even kind of provide some kind of status conditions. For instance, if all this, essentially what this does is take the data, calculates a 7-day mean for chlorophyll and the phycocyanin, which is the blue-green algae pigment, and kind of groups it into a category of concern based on some literature values. And so we can see if we're in if a particular site is high concern, minimum concern, or just kind of like a warning, like, hey, there's conditions out there. That information combined with remote sensing data produced by NOAA, we're able to kind of really get a more holistic picture of risk per se of blue-green algae. And then of course we have the actual blue-green algae sampling data. For instance, this map here is interactive, and you can click on it, points. There's a little legend here. Sometimes the data is not 100% up to date. You can kind of filter through things as well, which is pretty neat if you're kind of trying to understand some things. The biggest thing that we really focus on is discharges from Lake Okeechobee. So we have a lot of different metrics associated with salinity in the estuary and discharge to the estuary freshwater discharge. So there's a couple different metrics here. I want to get down to the red tide is another thing that we obviously focus on, and look at the map and the legend here. There's a bunch of different areas of interest. As you would imagine, we are really keen on understanding what is going on in the Caloosahatchee, San Carlos estuary and Pine Island Sound, but we also care about the larger area. So we care about along the Gulf Coast, and we of course care about you guys up there in Tampa Bay to see what kind of the conditions are. And so this is essentially pulling data from NOAA, the HAB-SOS program, through an API or kind of a backdoor query, and plotting it and summarizing it for us as well. Same thing with the blue-green algae. We have remote sensing information too. Throw in a couple red tide forecasts from the various different things. So I mean, you can tell this is a little long, and thankfully we're coming to the end. But here, discharging for a little bit further north. This is the estuary. We care about what's in Charlotte Harbor as well, because it can be indicative of what we are expected to see. But this is a lot of information that obviously doesn't make it onto the 1 to 2 page report. So if there's data geeks that are interested in things other than the 1 to 2 page report, we kind of, data geeks like myself, will go there and kind of look through a little bit. And like I said before, the final conditions report that we put out every week isn't 100% reproducible, but we're getting there. We're using the page that I showed earlier kind of to be able to construct a lot of that stuff. So it's a lot easier for staff to put it together, and it's consistent is the biggest thing. And so the information generated from that page feeds into that weekly report, but also we have a weekly water conditions tracker as well. And I don't know if they updated it recently. Doesn't look like it, but it's kind of a infographic that kind of gives a really quick distillation of information of conditions that are kind of a little bit flashier for public. And so the process is slowly evolving. We still have a little bit of tweaks to things to kind of evaluate and kind of understand how we can fold it in. For instance, external data sources. Granted, it's not too hard the code-wise, but trying to make sure we have consistent data is always the problem. And there's other things that we kind of want to also eventually fold in. Like for instance, we have a drone program set up that we every week go to the lighthouse on Sanibel and fly the drone as long as the conditions are right to be able to see the conditions. And this information has been pretty awesome, pretty valuable to show when, for instance, we have a lot of watershed runoff or from the estuary. You can kind of see, for instance, here we see that dark water plume to the left is kind of the estuary or where the river comes in. To the right is the Gulf of Mexico, and we can kind of pan around and look at cool things. Every once in a while, algae will pop up, and we'll be able to detect that as well. Other tools that we've kind of developed in the same vein, we have and it's not as flashy as your guys' reports by any means, but we have a water quality dashboard for the Caloosahatchee that was kind of a pet project that I put together forever ago, and kind of am slowly tweaking it, but essentially looking at, providing the information that's important for folks, assuming it's still up to date, water quality standards, where we have monitoring locations. For instance, this is the South Florida Water Management District monitoring locations throughout the estuary, and then kind of some visualizations of the actual grab samples and then kind of some annual mean value relative to water quality standards. And this is the freshwater head of the Caloosahatchee all the way down to the mouth, kind of the saltwater portion. We also have something similar for Lake Okeechobee, since it kind of is a big driver of our hydrology and water quality conditions. Every couple of years, the Department of Environmental Protection does an evaluation of their WIBIDs, and they deem if it's impaired or not. I wanted to kind of get a better that on a year-to-year basis and making sure I have that information at my fingertips. So I put together this page where this is Lake Okeechobee. This is the various monitoring locations that the Southwater Water Management District has and DEP leverages in their assessment. And each one of these kind of boxes is a different segment of the lake, which is weird if you can break up a lake like that, but okay, whatever. And so, depending on if you knew what water body ID you have, you're able to kind of look through and say, oh, well, I'm interested in 3212H. And looking at the conditions through the past, however many years, but also actually looking at the values and seeing if they pass fail, for instance. This is something that's kind of something we're interested in. And another thing is kind of not just cool data visualizations, but understanding kind of where we are relative to the period of record. If anybody's ever familiar with Go Hydrology, Bob Sladzak down at Big Cypress does a great job of summarizing a lot of information, within the state of Florida, but mostly South Florida centric. I kind of borrowed, flattery, imitation is the biggest form of flattery, right? So I kind of borrowed some of his ideas and made calendar plots, for instance, for regional rainfall for our area, which is, the Caloosahatchee kind of watershed area, but also understanding discharges through time and, from week essentially, and looking at from, discharge to the estuary as well as from Lake Okeechobee. And I mean, granted, these are kind of arbitrary bins, but kind of get an idea of when, for instance, water out of the lake is really high. For instance, in 2005, you can imagine why. That was back when we had back-to-back hurricanes. Or, for instance, back in 1990 when it was a severe drought and very little water came out of the lake. So those are kind of the other tools and reports that we've been able to kind of put together in an open science kind of context. And here's another version of another kind of figure that we've played with, and this is it's similar to the plot on that report, that web page that I showed of showing weekly recession, accession rates for Lake Okeechobee, and these metrics are specific to snail kite nesting. There's a performance measure for that, and so you can kind of, if you're not colorblind, unfortunately these colors don't work if you're colorblind, but essentially, you're able to see when we're in a good zone for snail kite nesting period or not. And it's kind of a quick data visualization if you can kind of train your eye a little bit. There's another version I've done that is specific to the snail kite nesting period, which it's in sometime in the spring. I can't remember off the top of my head right now. But ultimately, sharing is caring is kind of the key here. Is open science really isn't. It's really a continuum. It's not open or closed completely. For instance, there's code that I'm working on that I'm generating things online that aren't necessarily in my GitHub because I'm trying to tweak it to make sure it's doing the thing I want it to do. But there's other code on there that's freely available that you guys can download and completely, steal if you want. And so as code and tools are being kind of tested and put through their paces, they can be shared in some form. And there's always the question of like, how do I share my reports, my cool data visualizations, my tools, the things that I develop that are helping me that could also help you, for instance. And so, of course, there's GitHub. You can build your own web page through GitHub, relatively simple. Here's our tech page, which looks very oddly similar to the Tampa Bay Estuary program tech page, so it's very reminiscent. So we have that kind of situation. There's also RStudio Connect, which is an option that you're able to kind of share your markdown kind of products, or you can email them around. That's what so when I first started doing our markdown and open science kind of concepts, I would generate a report and email it to people. And I got tired of doing that. So I figured out different ways of kind of sharing it. RStudio Connect was one, and then I eventually evolved to understanding GitHub a little bit better. But there's also social media kind of avenues. So if you have a cool data viz kind of thing that you developed, something that I like to do sometimes is just post it on Twitter and say, hey guys, check this out. And here's a couple examples of one that I've done. I was trying to figure out, if you guys know of the McPherson and Miller paper, trying to figure out what sites used and kind of could I figure out how to generate a map to kind of better, for my brain, understand what was going on. And so I was able to pull together some information through USGS, but also, you know, kind of put together a map in our, you know, space, you know, using packages and all that kind of stuff. And so ultimately, this says gone is the dark times, but we're kind of in the transition between dark times of spreadsheets and countless folders of random maps and graphs and text and all that kind of stuff. So we're kind of transitioning out of that, what I call the dark times, because I remember it and it was very, it was tedious. But ultimately, this, you know, our stuff, open science kind of concept has allowed us to kind of really pull data from a lot of different places really quickly and provide a little bit of a clear kind of idea of what's going on a little bit. I say that, you know, tongue in cheek a little bit, but ultimately, I mean, we're pulling data from NOAA, USGS, Army Corps, South Florida Water Management District, FDP, FWC, Lee County, our own organization, and pulling it all into one pooled information source that we're able to kind of take that and inform people of what's going on. That's all I'm trying to do. And, you know, something that's really evolving is our integration of spatial data as well as our data visualizations to kind of really inform, evaluate, and convey the information a little bit better. It's also we get to put together some really interesting data sets from these different organizations to really both look at what's going on today, which is great, we need to know that, but we also kind of have to take a look back every once in a while. And so looking at the historical perspective, say, well, you know, what was the conditions like in 2005 when we had 5 hurricanes across the peninsula? And being able to kind of make a really quick evaluation of that is really awesome. And those are the slides that I put together. I didn't want to give you guys a tutorial of web scraping, API access, and all that kind of stuff. I just kind of want to show you the tools that are available to be able to be built. And I know there's a continuum of people's skills as well. I mean, there's some people that are live, breathe, and eat R and R Markdown, and there's some that are just getting into it. So don't despair. We're all learning, and there's ways to kind of share our information and share our data analysis. So I don't know if we want to take questions now or wait till after the other presentation, but I'm available for any. I don't care.
I have one if nobody else does.
Go ahead, Maya.
I just wanted to ask a little bit more about how, because this felt really familiar to me, so I really appreciated this talk. And I'm interested in what open science can do for democratizing knowledge. So I think, like what you said, tongue in cheek, you know, there are experts that have always sort of had their finger on the pulse and have known these systems, you know, better than many. But I think that open science can help us communicate this to the masses if they're curious. And so I'm kind of interested in some of the steps that you were talking about in terms of turning these things into infographics. And I'm particularly interested, I think that the messaging around the Everglades has been really successful in helping people understand natural hydrologic patterns and how the flow of water can influence water quality. We haven't, I don't think, done a good job of messaging on that point in Tampa Bay, and our Bay segment that struggles continuously is Old Tampa Bay. And we think that a big part of why it's struggling is because we don't have a natural water flow pattern there from the circulation perspective in the bay itself because of causeways and bridges, but also because of drainage control structures that are shunting water, much like Lake Okeechobee wasn't connected to the Gulf in that way. Our Lake Tarpon was not connected to Tampa Bay. It was connected to the Gulf, and now all of that overflow water comes down into Tampa Bay, and that creates challenges for us. So I'm interested in how you're getting like Scada data and how information for how the Water Management District is managing floodwaters, how you incorporate that, and then sort of the steps to translating these to the pretty and simplified distilled graphics.
Yeah, it's definitely an adventure to kind of do that. So the way we do it is South Florida Water Management District has a way of kind of almost like a semi-backdoor into their database, where they actually, you can build an HTML as long as you know how to query it. You can pull whatever information you want from their public database. And so if I wanted discharge data from S79, which is the structure that we care about usually the most, between now and 2 years ago, would be able to pull that in as a CSV into R and kind of move on with my analysis. There's other avenues too, as long as the data is available, right? So there's the data retrieval R package, which does a lot of that same thing, SGS specific structures. I'm not sure if there's any county level stuff for you guys that you're able to access that way, either through a backdoor or through simply just downloading it. I don't know if the Southwest Florida Water Management District is as sharing with their data access. I know
Robin Spidell's on the phone. Do you know?
Yeah, all data that we collect are made public, unless it's the only exception I think is if it's used to operate structures. We don't publish that data just because it's mainly used once again just to operate the structures. But yeah, all data should be available through what we have as an environmental data portal, in which it's like a map viewer that you can actually select sites and pull data from.
But
Did that answer?
But the exception that you noted is the one that I'm particularly interested in, which is the Scada control structure information, like for the outfall canal.
Yeah, about that. I don't think they publish that just because I want to say it's more of a Department of Homeland Security thing where I'm not a structures person, so I don't know exactly why it's not published, but then you would have to have people QA it, and it just adds a couple more variables to that equation.
Do you think that's something that, even if it's not made publicly available, that's something that we could maybe collaborate with the district on, at least for, not detailed nitty-gritty sharing, but for our information and for sort of synthesizing flow conditions?
Yes. So I'm trying to think because most of the water levels and items like that are used for structures are recorded, and they should be available on the EDP now that I think of it, because we just made a swap from the Scada server, which is what our operations team uses, to the LoggerNet server, which is what captures our continuous data. So data, I think, go through LoggerNet and then into Scada, and also it branches off and then goes into the EDP as well. So I think where water levels are being recorded at structures, that should be public. If not, feel free to shoot me an email, and I can reach out to those responsible parties and see why or why not that isn't available, if that helps you out.
Okay, thanks, Robin.
No problem.
Yeah. For perspective for us, for South Florida Water Management District, we the data that they put on their webpage or their databases, they pretty much anything that they collect usually is on there. So headwater, tailwater, gate openings, discharges, typically their rainfall, ET, anything they collect. So we're kind of lucky in that sense. But translating, the second part of your question is translating that to something like the pretty graphics or something that's relevant, right? And so let me see if I can go back to one of these. And if I'm taking too long, let me know and we can follow up later. But for instance, this this metric, this plot here, this calendar plot has these colors. I assume you guys can see that web page, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And so what these metrics really mean, they kind of relate back to the ecological condition of the estuary. And so there's a Recover, which is an Everglades specific performance measure for the estuary. It's called the salinity envelope. And so obviously the salinity in the estuary is dependent upon how much fresh water is being put into it. I mean, that's kind of one for one there. But so ultimately what these different discharge categories are, for instance, less than 457 is kind of our MFL, which is the regulatory thing. And granted, this isn't the way you evaluate it MFL wise, but if there's a weekly period that's below 457 for a really long period of time, then it's okay, that's a warning bell. The 750 to 2100, for instance, that's considered quote unquote optimal flow for the estuary. So that means the benthic communities are getting the right amount of flow. 100 to 26 is considered stressful. So for instance, that stressful category corresponds to seagrass and oyster impacts. So if then too much fresh water for too long, they kind of get stressed. 26 to 6500 is considered damaging. So if that's for a really prolonged period of time, then we're going to have, essentially ecological impacts associated with that. And this greater than 6500 is considered extreme discharges. And that extreme, well, in these categories also affect the estuary spatially too. So that extreme category actually pushes the dark water plume as well as fresh water out into past San Carlos Bay into the Gulf of Mexico. And so there's ecological reasons for these categories. And so that's kind of what I leveraged a little bit, but I assume that there's other ecologically relevant conditions for, Old Tampa Bay, for instance, that's relevant and being able to summarize the data in that sense. This is kind of a categorical evaluation of the data a little bit to some extent, but at least it paints a picture. Well, look, 2007 was really low, and oh crap, 2016 was really high. For instance, just looking at it from a high-low perspective, and that I think helps a little bit. But understanding what these different metrics mean too is also another. Trying to convey that's the hard part.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, we should probably move on.
Cool.
Definitely appreciate that, Paul. That's great stuff.
Thanks, Paul. All right, so we will move on to our second speaker today is Alex, and she'll be talking about open science efforts in the Long Island Sound study.
Okay, just trying to share my screen here. Can you guys see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. So thanks for having me today. My name's Alex Hadell, and like I said in the beginning, I'm a postdoc fellow in EPA Region 2 in New York, focused on implementing open science in the Long Island Sound was my charge. And I have to, I think, mention that I have Marcus to thank actually for my job in the first place, because some of the talks he's been giving over the years really inspired the folks at the Long Island Sound Study to want to implement open science and try to bring open science principles to the study. So he was as a very direct influence on my work and also my job itself. So I'm going to touch on three things today. One is just kind of generally talking about background on where I'm coming from and my sort of recent journey to open science, and also just kind of background on the state of open science related issues in the Long Island Sound study. And then I'll jump in and talk a little bit about this first project I've been focused on so far, which is cleaning up monthly point source nitrogen loading data from EPA data sources. And then I'll touch a little bit on some of my plans for the future. So I actually just graduated from my PhD in May and started at the Long Island Sound Study in June. So I'm still kind of new to this stuff because what the PhD itself helped me learn was how to manipulate and analyze data in R. And I'm actually sort of a soil biogeochemist studying reactive nitrogen losses in agricultural systems. So now I'm kind of learning lots of things at the same time, learning all about aquatic ecology and estuaries, and also trying to learn some new tools to implement in the Long Island Sound Study. So I'm just kind of taking it step by step over the last 6 or 7 months here, and I'll talk a little bit about what I've been focused on. And I just wanted to mention also that, I think all of the students pretty much coming out of graduate programs in the natural sciences these days are going to have some level of programming skills, most likely. And I just wanted to share too that I feel pretty lucky that as I was learning how to use R during my PhD, the tidyverse kind of set of packages and tools were gaining in popularity over the same time period. And if you're out there in sort of more the earlier stages of learning how to use R, I personally found it was a lot easier to use and learn when I started using some of those packages like dplyr and tidyr and things like that. So I've been kind of focusing on some new skills since then. And I thought looking at my contributions on my GitHub page was sort of a funny encapsulation of this because in my PhD, I knew about GitHub and I knew that it was a powerful tool for version control, but I just was too lazy and I wasn't really all that incentivized to actually use it. So there were plenty of instances that now looking back, I know I could have saved myself a lot of headache and time if I was properly, uploading it and using it for version control. But I was really just dumping code and data there right as I was getting ready to submit a publication. And so now in the last couple months and for this last project, I've been using it a lot more frequently and I can see the value for sure. I definitely go back and look at different versions of my code as I'm, overhauling some visualization or something. It's really nice to be able to go back in time and see what was there previously, and gives me a little bit of peace of mind knowing that all of my work, has been saved and is available to access there. So I call this, baby steps towards open science because I'm kind of taking it bit by bit. I think for now I've been focused just on, properly using GitHub for version control and collaborating with one other person. So just really kind of starting to use some of the features available there and focused on learning R Shiny, which was one of the tools that my bosses at the study were really interested in kind of bringing to the table. So I'm not really writing packages yet for my workflows. I'm doing a little bit of things like requesting data from APIs, but it's just like bit by bit that I'm starting to use these things and seeing the value of them over time. So here is sort of a nice snapshot of what the information and data communication pretty much looks like at the moment on the Long Island Sound Study website. So this is for nitrogen loading, which is one of the most important things that we track. Hypoxia area is sort of the main ecosystem target that the study has really been focused on for the last few decades. And point source nitrogen loading is closely tied to that. So, we have information like this on our website, and it's a little bit interactive. You can mouse over the values for the different years, and you can see there where we've actually met the goal in recent years and hit our target for nitrogen load reductions. But it's really, it's difficult to actually access the data itself. If you wanted to, say, download these values to use for an analysis, that's not very easy to do at the moment. And I think that in general, the information that we have and the few kind of graphics that are on the website are also sort of hiding a whole wealth of data that have been funded and collected by the study that you wouldn't even know about from visiting our website. So there's a lot of work to do in kind of, I think, the term that was mentioned, the dark times. We're still very early in this process. Like Paul said, we're still sort of in the dark times, but we're slowly kind of transitioning to the light and trying to bring this data out and make it accessible for our partners and the public and for other researchers to use. So it was a little overwhelming when I first got on board because these are the main topics that everyone was really interested in kind of building some kind of open science tool for. But when I started asking around and trying to figure out how to prioritize this, I kind of ran into a few different challenges. And one being that, you know, going from just this general topic of like eelgrass monitoring or non-point source loading to, you know, kind of distilling that into a very specific purpose and kind of understanding exactly who the audience would be and what kind of information they would want in order to build some kind of open science tool it has been a challenge. So I think I'm kind of constantly trying to push the partners on the study to really understand what exactly like what they want to use these information, these data for, so that it informs, you know, how I would analyze the data, how I would visualize it and communicate it. And then the other big barrier so far has been, you know, data access and the quality of the data themselves. So when I was asking for things like, you know, can someone point me to the data set where the eelgrass monitoring, you know, is, they would say, oh yeah, there's this report, here's a, you know, 200-page PDF, and the data is all there. And, you know, for those of you who work with tools like R, you know that, you know, that would be a challenge to translate something out of a PDF and get it into a nice tabular format and CSV to work with in R. So those are some of the challenges that that we're still facing. But what I was able to do was bring together the folks on the Long Island Sound study who are most involved in generating some of these data streams and getting this data online into databases where we'll be able to quickly access and use in the future. And they all kind of pointed for the first step and priority to be working on the monthly point source loading data for the Long Island Sound watershed. So what I showed you a couple slides back was just looking at annual, like daily rates for annual loads across the two, you know, main states, New York and Connecticut, where the hypoxia is most severe. But there were lots of different modeling efforts and different interests across partners in the study in looking at the more granular monthly nitrogen loading data from EPA databases. So that's what I've been focused on so far. And in case you would be interested in kind of knowing more about this, I'll note that the data from 2017, I think, and forward, or maybe 2018 and forward, is now available and accessible on this API, the ECHO Web Services from the EPA. And so every month, point source facilities, industrial sources or wastewater treatment plants that are in the ECHO database for EPA, their point source data or their regular monthly monitoring data is uploaded and refreshed every month. So this is a nice newer resource for accessing this type of data. And then I was able to also access from colleagues at the EPA data from prior to 2017 so that I could summarize that and clean that up for our purposes as well. And I love this slide from Jenny Bryan, who's sort of a famous R programmer, that, you know, data science and data visualization you think it's going to be all fun and you're going to be building all these like beautiful tools and visualizations, but in reality, you're going to be spending a lot of time just cleaning the data up to get it ready for that stage. And the rule of thumb that people will often say is like 70% of the time the data scientists spend is on data cleaning. And I'll say that was certainly true for this first project that I took on. So I won't bore you too much with the details of this, but this is just a snapshot of what the data coming out of the ECHO database look like. And this is just for one wastewater treatment plant and 1 month. So there's a lot of columns here of information that are related to regulatory and compliance purposes that I didn't really need, but that I did need to understand well enough to sort of distill down the information to an estimate, just one estimate of nitrogen loads in the effluent from each outfall. So it took a lot of data wrangling to take this really messy data set with issues like variables in both columns and rows, and lots of sort of columns that were causing duplication, to tidy that up and have just one clean estimate, one observation per outfall per month of the nitrogen loading. So that was maybe more than half the battle, was getting it to that point. And then when I did that, I also quickly discovered that there were a lot of data quality and data assurance concerns with the data in these databases. So I don't know all the details of this, and maybe some of you on the call would know better, but my understanding is that I think this data is for the most part self-reported from the wastewater treatment plants, and I think some states play maybe more of an active role in kind of collating it or checking it before it gets into ECHO. I'm not really sure. But I did find that there were, and in kind of speaking with others at EPA who know about this, they were not shocked to discover that there are lots of like manual data entry errors in here. And some of them were really like systematic, where there would be a sharp break in time where the flows or the nitrogen loads look like they jump up by 3 orders of magnitude, and it stays like that for a number of years. So there were lots of sort of issues with that. Here are a couple of examples of like one-off outliers here, or the more systematic ones like this that I had to kind of look through and try to determine what was causing that and how to manually go through and resolve those issues. Another major issue with these data was that there were a lot of just gaps in time in reporting. And for the purposes that I think people plan to use this, I thought we should probably estimate what the nitrogen loads are for those reporting gaps, because we assume that for the most part there's still nitrogen flowing through these wastewater treatment plants, and that there was just gaps for whatever reason in reporting over time. So there's a rough kind of first go at that with, I just had these rolling means as imputed values for filling in the gaps in time and reporting, and you can see some instances of that in specific months where there were maybe outliers that I imputed with a seasonal mean. But we now have, and I'm working actually on trying out a couple of other different methods to maybe try to capture some of the more natural variation we'd expect to see in these gaps in time. But anyway, this is definitely a big improvement over what we had to start, in that we have relatively solid estimates for monthly point source loading for 165 facilities in the Long Island Sound watershed, going back from approximately the 90s to present. And last thing that we did look into, and one of the motivations for this was we wanted to see whether subannual variation in nitrogen loading was related to what could help explain the variation that we see in hypoxia area over time. But we did not find really any relationship between the two. So there's definitely some other things going on that we have not yet discovered that are really controlling some of the variation in hypoxia area. So finally, this is all available. It is still a work in progress. I am still trying to update. I'm kind of finalizing the Shiny app data visualization for this and finalizing, like I said, playing around still with some of the methods themselves. But you can, if you're interested, you could see this repository is public on GitHub. And then my plans are to try to publish some kind of paper in open access related to this work, and then make that information much more accessible and available on our Long Island Sound Study website. For next steps, we want to try to focus a little bit more on habitat quality. We have a couple of ecosystem targets for habitat quality related to restoration, and we're interested in trying to understand, where to prioritize restoration efforts, in particular for eelgrass, and also for salt marshes as well. But there's a real sort of lack of monitoring data currently. I think the state of eelgrass monitoring in Long Island Sound Study is that they do flyovers approximately every 3 to 5 years. I'm not sure exactly what the time interval is. And, COVID recently had disrupted a couple of the recent summer months plans to do flyovers and do that monitoring. So there's really not enough information at the moment to understand the distribution and the variation in distribution over time of eelgrass in the study. And what we're hoping to do is, there was a pilot study in 2018 with some colleagues from different parts of EPA where they went out and did field work to ground truth satellite data, and then we're able to come up with methods and algorithms to estimate seagrass distributions and abundances using satellites. So now that we have established those relationships, we're hoping to go back in time and process the satellite imagery for all of the Long Island Sound, going back as far as we can. And I'm hoping to do that in Google Earth Engine to process that large amount of satellite imagery to give us better estimates, much more granular information on seagrass distributions over time. So that's some of the things that we're planning on tackling next. And with that, I want to just thank you for your attention and would love to take any questions or comments that you have.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Any questions for Alex?
Alex, this is Mike McManus. I've got a question. I was interested about the hypoxia relationship you talked about. And so I was wondering, are you going to try to take a look at that seasonally? I know you initially looked at, I guess it was annual load estimates.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the idea, was that the seasonal information would be maybe helpful if there's like anomalies in the spring or summer, or I was thinking also maybe winter or spring months. And I did look at groupings of both of those with the hypoxia area itself, and I really didn't find any relationship with either of those groupings and hypoxia area, or also I tried, there were recent calculations of hypoxia volume, and we also found really no relationship with that either. So I'm still kind of new to the whole, to all of this estuary science. So I know I know that there's a lot of work to understand the flow and the circulation of water around the western edge of the Long Island Sound, where the East River, is bringing lots of nitrogen from New York City to the western edge of the Sound. But I think that apparently there's not a great understanding of the variation in that delivery from year to year or month to month. And there's a lot of modeling efforts at the moment that are underway to try to better understand that. But so that is one of the many sort of potential explanations that I think our data are not capturing. And another one that I think is relatively important is in New York City there are these big problems with combined sewer overflow events that are not captured at all in this ECHO data. So when there are really big storm events, there could be large amounts of nitrogen being delivered to the East River that then get delivered to the Sound that are just not at all showing up in our measurements. And then of course lots of different climate variables as well could affect. So yeah. So that's kind of my brief explanation at the moment.
Thank you.
So I have a question for Alex and maybe also Paul. One of my motivating reasons for inviting you both to this meeting was that I think both of you have like really unique perspectives on what it's like to like do open science in the trenches. And as I was, speaking to both of you guys before this call, we're sort of like kindred spirits in the sense that I think we're all trying to like see what it's like to use open science in the real world to hopefully improve how science is distilled and used by managers. And both of you kind of like hit on this of like how your science is being received within the broader audience, but do you, and this is just a general question for both of you, like, do both of you guys feel like we're actually making progress towards like moving out of the dark ages to actually more facilitated science implementation? Or if not, like, what do you see like the real barriers? Like, do you feel like at your organization you are actually like making science more accessible, or you're just doing things that you think people should be doing, but nobody's actually like implementing them? And either Alex or Paul can chime in.
Yeah, sorry. Paul, do you want to go? You can go ahead first.
Okay, yeah. So I think it's a mixed bag, right? So back in my former life at a particular agency that's in the state of Florida, open science was a really weird concept and very shut. It wasn't very welcomed by any means. It was a cool tool, and I was able to generate some really cool data visualizations or data queries. But the most frequent, I guess, comment that I would always get is, "Oh, can you share the spreadsheet?" And of course I would have to go, "No, I don't really have a spreadsheet. I have code." And they would scratch their head for a little bit and go, "What do you mean?" So it was kind of, it's a way of thinking, I guess, and it's slowly changing because now that I talk to some folks that I talked to in my former life, they are like, "Hey, I'm starting to work with R now, and we're starting to share code and all that kind of stuff." But I think that's at the level. It's not necessarily at the manager, mid-level to the higher per se, depending on what organization you're looking at. Now, stuff that we're doing, and some of the stuff that I've done with other folks from a NGO science perspective, I think we're getting there slowly. It's still a little bit of hesitation because it's like, oh, well, what if someone found a bug in our code and all our analysis is wrong? And my frequent response is so? And we found a bug. Okay, let's fix it. It's not that I'm going to be crucified because I screwed up my code. Granted, it may change our results a little bit, but hey, that's what science is all about, right? We're collectively learning with each other, and not necessarily bastardizing anybody, which that's the old guard, and I want to get rid of that. But it's a slow evolution, and I think organizations like Tampa Estuary program, some of the other folks that are involved in this open science concept is really, we're pushing the needle, not as fast as we want per se, but we're getting there a little bit by little.
Yeah, I think the fact that I got hired for this role, from the EPA staff directly is a good sign, and is, Long Island Sound funding has been exploding in recent years, and got a big, infusion from the infrastructure bill, and there's so much money that goes into all of this data collection, and I think they know that they're really not doing right by the public, by having the sort of dark process that is currently there. But I do think the will is there, but certainly it's kind of slow. It's slow, and I think one of the challenges is that because a lot of it varies a lot from partner to partner on how much they use these types of tools, and the partners I work with at USGS and in academia are really advanced more than I am in many cases in using these types of tools and pushing it forward. But at the state agencies and some of the smaller partners, they're definitely still farther behind. And I asked for data, and it comes out of a Microsoft Access database, and it's a mess. And so I think doing a better job of kind of building collaborations to move this forward is something that I would like to do, but I'm challenged to do because of some of those like technological and understanding barriers. But I do think it's, again, like a really good sign that EPA is kind of funding my position and really focused on this, trying to move forward.
Yeah, I think that's leaps and bounds ahead of where we were, say, 5 years ago, let alone now. And I think a lot of people are also a little, some people are adverse to the whole idea of open source software per se.
Yeah.
So, well, so-and-so put this together and blah, blah. What they don't understand is, at least with R and some of the Python communities, it's actually, there's a rigorous kind of standard that we have to meet to have the software out to use it. And with it being open source, we're able to find bugs in it and fix them relatively quick, and make it so that what we're generating in R is consistent with what folks are generating in Excel. Is always the biggest kind of bridge I think that we have to divide. It's a little tenuous at times because they don't understand it, but I think we're getting there.
Well said, both of you guys. We're actually at 11:30, so we gotta cut the call. But before we go, I wanted to again thank both our speakers for participating today. That's been a great meeting, I think. And I do want to just share the schedule for this year before we go. Right. So actually a few other things to announce. Myself, Alex, actually, and a few others, we are organizing an open science session at the Joint Aquatic Sciences meeting in May up in Michigan. So I just wanted to put a call out for that. Actually, abstract submission is over, but if you are attending that meeting, I think you'll find our session to be of interest. So we're trying to, again, start this broader conversation about how open science is a helpful, useful thing that we all can value from. Basis, we talked about that earlier, but that date is horribly wrong. It should be March, early March is when that's going down, but look forward to that. And then the 2022 subcommittee meetings, the plan, these are the dates here for this year. The plan is for the next one to be May 3rd. I'm not sure everybody on the call knows this yet, but I'll be on paternity leave around that time. So I'm kind of keeping that as a placeholder. I think my wife's due early March, so I'm hoping by that time I'll maybe transition back into work, but I'm not making any promises. So I guess wait for an announcement on whether or not that meeting is going down. But for now, it's on the schedule. So if that doesn't happen, our next one will be August 2nd. So with that, again, thanks to our speakers. Appreciate everybody being on the call today, and have a good rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.